Could we see a Pierre-Luc Dubois trade to Montreal as early as this summer, possibly at the draft? Today we're going to review another trade proposal talked about in Montreal media publication. Plus, did Pierre-Luc Dubois actually want the Habs to come get him and offer sheet or trade for him back in 2020 when things were going south with the Columbus Blue Jackets? We'll discuss what we learned on that scenario. Plus, we have lots more playoff action to recap. We have a fine in the NHL as well. Some injury updates and another player leaving to head over to Europe. All that coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have lots to cover here today. Before we get into the trade stuff, let's take a first look at a few news items and we're going to recap what we've seen here in the Stanley Cup playoffs. First up, before we get too much into the news, I want to acknowledge Justin Braun, longtime NHL defenseman, officially announced his retirement here today. It's been officially put out by the NHLPA. We already kind of got word through the Flyers that the last regular season game that he was going to be retiring, but it's now official. 842 games in his career, 199 points, which is pretty good for a defenseman that was really always considered a stay-at-home D, not really known for his offensive skills so much. So those are pretty impressive numbers. Ended up playing basically 12 seasons, 9 years with the Sharks, 3 years with the Flyers. Getting to the NHL about 3 years after being drafted. He was a late draft pick as well. So certainly a pretty solid career overall. So just want to wish Justin Braun the best of luck in retirement and certainly acknowledge the pretty solid career he had. Even though he's one of those guys that kind of flies under the radar, doesn't always get a lot of acknowledgement or attention, but he was certainly solid in his own right during the core part of his career. We also see longtime NHLer and AHLer Martin Frk leave North America and sign a 2-year deal over in the Swiss League. Frk certainly played more in the AHL than he did in the NHL, but he's somebody who I always thought really should have had more of an opportunity in the NHL. Started in the Red Wings organization, was with the Kings organization for quite a while as well. Had a wicked hard shot. He was quite often the winner of a harder shot competition at the AHL. I really, based on his production and how things went, I always thought he should have had more of an NHL opportunity, but it never really worked out for the NHL teams he was with to kind of see it that way. And certainly understand him looking for more of an opportunity. So after grinding in North America for the best part of his career in the minors, makes sense that he's heading overseas to play in the Swiss League. Probably has an opportunity to make a little bit more money there. Some injury updates as well. Going into the next game for the Boston Bruins, it's still not clear if David Krejci or Patrice Bergeron are going to play. We don't know the extent of that. Bergeron is more likely than Krejci at this point. Bergeron did skate with the Bruins, I believe, today and is likely to play in their next game, which is scheduled for Wednesday. David Krejci did not skate today. It's not clear when he will. Apparently, according to the Bruins, he's undergoing some additional tests, and we'll have to see. So they could be without at least one or maybe both of their top centers and longtime veteran players here as they head into Game 5 against the Florida Panthers as the series returns to Boston. On the Panthers side, not quite clear yet as well on Aaron Ekblad. I know Anthony Duclair missed the last game as well. Some thought it might have been a healthy scratch, but it was reporting after the fact that he was actually dealing with an injury, got banged up during warm-ups or something. So that wasn't a case of him sitting out because the coaches wanted to put in somebody else into the lineup. And staying with Florida, NHL player safety also announced today after the game yesterday between the Bruins and Panthers that Matthew Tkachuk has been fined $5,000 for cross-checking against Bruins forward Garnet Hathaway. That game certainly had its fair share of chaos as well. We've seen a lot of that, and I don't imagine it's going to slow down any as the Panthers are going to be fighting to survive in the next game, and the Bruins are going to be fighting to wrap things up at home so they can get a rest before heading on to the second round. Of course, yesterday's playoff action featured 4 more games. Yesterday, when I did my video last evening, talking about the latest news of Rumours, we did talk about some of the recaps, and we did cover off the earlier games, including the Hurricanes picking up a 5-2 victory over the Islanders, and the Bruins, of course, winning 6-2 over the Florida Panthers. So, of course, those games were already completed when I did the last video last night. And then later into the evening, we saw the Dallas Stars beat the Wild 3-2. Tyler Seguin had a pair of goals, including the game winner. The Wild didn't get on the scoreboard until into the third period. Ended up getting a goal from John Klingberg earlier in the period, a later one from Freddie Gaudreau to make it interesting. Jake Auger was an absolute beast for the Dallas Stars, holding them in there and actually making some big saves, especially near the end when the Wild were pushing and trying to get things tied up. But speaking of tied up, the series is now tied up at 2 games apiece after the Stars pick up that victory. And we saw quite a game in Edmonton last night, I guess not in Edmonton, in LA, between the Oilers and Kings. Another game goes to overtime. The series has been incredibly close so far, and we're now all tied up at 2 after the Oilers pick up a 5-4 overtime victory. Early in the game, it was not looking good. I honestly thought the Oilers might be done for. They're down 2-1 in the series, and LA gets off to a wicked 3-0 lead in the first period. The Oilers were not playing well, making mistakes. Defense wasn't good, and ultimately grab an early 3-0 lead at the end of the first period. And, it was gut check time if you're Edmonton. As the first intermission get underway, Jack Campbell was told he was going into the game to take over for Stuart Skinner. I think more than anything, that was a case of the Oilers just trying to shake things up and wake up the players. I mean, yes, Skinner allowed 3 goals in a period, which isn't great. But for the most part, I mean, not to say that Skinner's been awesome lately, but he certainly wasn't been terrible either. But they just needed a spark. They needed to do something to shake things up, and Campbell came in and played really well. They came out way better in the second period, got some power play opportunities, took advantage, and just really dominated the play with extended time in the offensive zone, ended up getting things tied up in the second period. Getting multiple goals from Leon Draisaitl and a big goal from Evan Bouchard to kick things off as well in the power play. And by the end of the second, we were back even at 3-3, which was where the Oilers wanted to try to get to. And then early in the third, though, the Oilers did get a goal from defenseman Matt Roy to retake the lead again. And it took the Oilers a good chunk of the rest of the period to get things tied up. With about 3 minutes to go, Evander Kane scores. Finally get some more secondary scoring for the Oilers here. Kane scores to tie things up. We end up going to overtime. And then after a good amount of time played in overtime, Zach Hyman comes down the wing and scores on a really good shot, beating Korpisalo. Korpisalo was fantastic in this game. It has been all series as well. Hyman gets the OT winner, so it's nice to see again, like between Kane and Hyman, to get some secondary scoring. It's been largely Leon Draisaitl. McDavid had a couple big goals in the game before that. Draisaitl and McDavid, with Draisaitl driving a big chunk of it, has been the main offensive driver. They need more players to be getting involved. And I understand that the Kings have been doing well to defend, but they got to find a way to break through. Now, here's an interesting stat based on what we've seen happen in last night's game with the Oilers and Kings. Since 1980, going all the way back there, obviously that's a long, long time ago here, over 40 years. And since 1980, teams that overcame a 3-goal deficit in a playoff game to come back and win have had a series record of 45-17. So when that happens, the team that overcame the 3-goal deficit to win a playoff game has a very high history of winning the series. So that bodes well for Edmonton if that history can continue. The Oilers themselves, when that's happened to them before, are 4-0, which is good in their sake. And the LA Kings have had it happen to them twice, where they were the team that gave up the 3-goal lead and had the other team come back on them. And that's happened to them 2 times, and they're 0-2 in those series. So that's, I guess, if you're looking for a way to be optimistic as an Oilers fan, that's just an interesting stat that might, prove to be something you might want to look at. We'll see if the next game and how the rest of the series go, but I would think that that's going to be a huge boost for the Oilers. Now they're heading back home to their home arena in Game 5, and obviously have home ice advantage here with possibility of hosting Games 5 and 7 if necessary. The way the Kings have played this team, I'll be shocked if it ends in 6. I really think this series is going 7 games going to the distance, but the Oilers, I still think they're favored to win, but by the slimmest margins. The Kings are probably the toughest possible opponent in the first round for Edmonton to face. I think the way they stack up against them between Philip Deneau and the way the D plays them, especially Doughty and Anderson, if Edmonton can get through LA, I think they're going to have an ability to go on a deep run, but that might be the first round sometimes can be the toughest. Now, in tonight's action, of course, we got the evening will start at 7 o'clock Eastern with the Rangers Devils. Half an hour later, you get Leafs Lightning. At 9:30 Eastern, you get Jets Vegas. And then at 10 Eastern, you get Colorado and Seattle. And another interesting stat there as well in the Leafs Lightning series. Of course, the Leafs have a long Stanley Cup drought, a long playoff series victory drought. Of course, we know that. The Leafs haven't won a cup since 1967. They haven't won a playoff series in just shy of 20 years. So it's obviously been a long time coming. I know Leaf fans have been suffering long enough. They'd love to see that trend change and have them win this first round series. And right now they're on track to do that. But tonight's going to be an absolutely pivotal game against this Lightning team as they're on the road. An interesting stat, though, there's been 11 attempts in Game 4s in recent memory since 1994. So you go back to 94. There's been 11 times the Maple Leafs have had a 2-1 series lead with a chance to go up 3-1. Okay, they've only done it one time. So they tend to have a history recently, which they need to change if they're going to have more success, of letting the teams that are playing get back into the series and come back on it. We've seen it happen last year against Tampa. We've seen it happen in recent memory multiple times against the Boston Bruins. We've even seen it during the last couple of years when they faced the Montreal Canadiens, Columbus Blue Jackets. They've struggled in those series too. Like as I heard Carlo Coliacco of TSN talking on his program this morning, first up, talking about now is the time that the Leafs need to show their killer instinct. They've missing ingredient for the Leafs the last number of years to get through this first round hump. They've been missing that, and we've even heard the team say it themselves in the last couple of years too. They seem to think they've addressed it, and I guess we're gonna have to wait to be seen. I know Sheldon Keefe said for tonight they were pending multiple roster changes. They said they had a bunch of game time decisions, but they wouldn't let on who that was going to be. But I do agree with Carl on the fact that if they need to show that killer instinct tonight, they need to go down into Tampa and they need to take that game and play the way they did in the last game. Actually, better than that, because really, I think most people would agree that Toronto wasn't necessarily the better team in Game 3, but they found a way to win. They got the timeliness of the beginning of the goals when they needed it to walk away with the win and the series lead, even though you could argue Tampa deserved to win that game as much or more. At the same time, though, I said that's where the killer instinct comes in. They have a lead. They need to really put the stranglehold on them, or they're going to let Tampa back in the series. So we'll see tonight. It's a pivotal game. If they're going to change their history and have a chance to succeed, then tonight they need to win, or they could be in trouble of repeating history yet again, in my opinion. Now, on to the Dubois-Montreal conversation. We've heard a lot lately about Dubois going to Montreal. We've talked about this on occasion as well. And I know in my work there off-season plan series right now for all teams, I'll what to expect from them in the off-season. Montreal was the most recent team I've published here in the last 24 hours. And obviously I did talk about that in that video, talk about how they could be looking to target Dubois this offseason. They might be looking to obviously draft a guy like possibly like Mitchkoff or Will Smith in the early first round. Just kind of looking at what to expect from them. But obviously Dubois was part of that conversation. In that video, we didn't really talk about, what the trade scenarios were going to look like or anything of that nature. Just that it's rumored that he obviously heavily, really, really wants to go there, and that they might be very likely to pull off a deal to make it happen this offseason. But we have more to talk about here now. We have Montreal Hockey Now, our article from a couple days ago, talking about, it's more like a mailbag type article where the author is getting some questions, and there was a trade proposal, and there was generating a lot of conversations around the internet here. So I thought different people on different social media apps or whatever were talking about this trade proposal. So I want to kind of weigh in with my 2 cents on it. And we also get some new information revealed on the Pierre-Luc Dubois to Montreal scenario that we didn't know before. So Aaron Portzline, who covers the Columbus Blue Jackets for The Athletic and has been a guest on the Tony Marinaro show on this podcast multiple times, made some comments about Dubois that we didn't really know before. Of course, he wouldn't have a lot of inside scoop on Dubois during his time in Columbus. Now, we know in 2020, things really soured between Dubois and the Jackets when we all learned that he wanted out and that he was going to be looking for a trade. He started the season there, and then it was odd. I mean, Tortorella was still coaching in Columbus. The relationship, you could tell, was very much changed. The relationship certainly had a lot of tension there. Dubois, you could tell, didn't want to be there anymore. And it's believed during the offseason that he made it known during negotiations that he wanted to go to Montreal. And Aaron Portzline says that he believes that in 2020, during that summer when he needed a new contract, that he wanted Montreal Canadiens' then general manager, Marc Bergevin, to basically come rescue him out of Columbus. He was hoping, and probably to some degree expecting, but really hoping that the Montreal Canadiens would come along and offer sheet him, and if not, to trade for him to become a Montreal Canadien at that point in his career. Of course, that's when it kind of first became known, at least not necessarily so much publicly, but internally in Columbus, that he not only would want out, but that's really where he wanted to go. And obviously, knowing that he didn't want to stay there and how he was feeling certainly really soured the relationship between himself and the team. So it makes a lot more sense now. All we knew before was that negotiations weren't going well. he didn't want to sign long-term and that he wanted a trade. But nobody really knew. A lot of people speculated that it was his relationship with head coach John Tortorella, that he did not like playing for Torts, and he wanted to be traded and gone from the organization to continue his career elsewhere. It wasn't until later that we learned about his strong desire to be a Montreal Canadien. Obviously, like I said, I'm sure there were more people closer to the situation and knew this back then, and even though a lot of us only learned of it in the past year or so. So ultimately, that's pretty substantial news that he's been wanting to go to Montreal for a long time, and it's certainly playing a big role in his Columbus exit. Obviously, they ended up trading him to the Winnipeg Jets because at the end of the day, they didn't really care too much about what he wanted. They had to get the best return. They get Patrick Laine out of Winnipeg, which at the time seemed like a pretty good deal for both clubs. Obviously, both were young players that were wanting a fresh start with a new team. Both of them lacking a long-term deal. And it made a lot of sense that a one-for-one swap just might make sense for both teams. Now, of course, like I said, at that time, we didn't know that Dubois really had it in his heart to want to end up in Montreal. So that does change things quite substantially. But that's certainly interesting info to learn about that. And now the latest trade proposal in the Montreal Hockey Now mailbag article I wanted to talk about was proposed by one of the readers. And now the author doesn't know that this is the greatest trade proposal. He kind of disagreed with it himself. He thought that Montreal should wait and target him as a UFA the season after, because he can sign another one-year deal in Winnipeg, play out the season, and walk for nothing. Now, will Winnipeg do that, though, is the question. I don't know that Kevin Cheveldayoff is going to take that chance. I don't see him hitting UFA status. At the same time, you can't really always force that. But, at the same time, like with Cheveldayoff, the Jets, and Dubois, he doesn't have that trade protection right now. So they can trade him. But who's going to want to take him? They can't sign him, right? That's the key thing. So the leverage is in his court, not so much the team that's trading him being the Winnipeg Jets. But the trade proposal was essentially the following. It's that they have 2 second-round picks in Montreal this year, including Florida's, that they obtained for Ben Sherratt, which is going to always be a lower pick. They include the first-round pick for the Panthers, centerman Christian Dvorak, and a couple of prospects, with one being, they said, a prospect that's maybe considered around their 5th or 6th best prospect, and they contemplated their second pick in the 2022 NHL draft, Philip Mesar, of course, fellow countryman Jerard Fagerberg, great friend of his as well. I don't know that Mesar would be a guy that the Jets are going to want, but I understand that the sentiment here that they want to give up a first, a good centerman that can be a middle 6 center in Dvorak, and then you're looking at like a prospect like Mesar, and then maybe another prospect, maybe somebody that's ranked a little bit lower, or maybe you're looking at like a second, third round pick, something of that nature. So essentially 4 assets for Dubois. The author says that he thought that it might be, an underwhelming return for the Winnipeg Jets, and to some degree I do agree with the sentiment, but the Winnipeg Jets aren't going to have any leverage here. That's the problem. As Montreal is going to have all the leverage in a potential trade, knowing that Dubois could sign a 1-year deal and then walk. If they let him sign that 1-year deal, it's very dangerous without trading him. So clearly they don't want that to happen. So at the end of the day, they need to be able to trade him, and they need to be able to trade him to a team that's going to be able to sign him, because at this point, everybody knows Dubois wants to go to Montreal, and another team is not going to come along and take him and give you a good return, because they know at most they're getting him for 1 year. So why would they want to do that? It creates a really unlikely probability of having another trade partner besides the Habs. They're going to want to take advantage of this and get the best deal that they possibly can. So ultimately, that's why they figure the return might be less than you might expect, but the leverage isn't there to generate bigger value. So Pierre-Luc Dubois for Christian Dvorak, Philip Mesar, a first-round pick, which would be the Florida Panthers first-rounder in 2023, and then a secondary prospector pick might be included in there as well. So to me, that's decent considering you don't have the leverage. But the author didn't really like the deal. Now, to me, I don't know that Dvorak is going to satisfy the Jets for a player that can help now. I think they'd probably prefer something a little higher end, or maybe a player that's a prospect that has a higher end probability right now than Mesar. Mesar is a good young player. They still think he's got lots of potential, but he hasn't had the greatest year, and I think it's fair to say that he's, not as high on the Habs prospect depth chart as some might think. I know he's going to be a little ways away for really being NHL ready. If you ask me, in my opinion, I think they'd be more likely to maybe target some other young players on the team that the Jets would be interested in, potentially Riley Kidney, or maybe even like James Struble, or maybe even some other younger players around the team as well that might be already available on their roster. So, it's hard to say. Maybe Joshua Wall is another name that comes to mind as well. But there's certainly going to be players that the Habs don't really want to include here. But at the end of the day, Elliotte Friedman himself, the top NHL insider, said he feels there's a 90% chance Dufour ends up at Montreal this year. I do think if it happens, the return's going to be underwhelming, and the Jets are going to have to kind of feel like they're losing them, but they're going to feel that way anyway. It's just that simple. If they let him sign a one-year deal and walk, they're going to get nothing. So why not get as best you can and move on here? Now, it seems to make a lot of sense. If you ask me, all of the return, like I said, might not be the greatest. I kind of wonder if you change things up a bit and go with a different return. But knowing his the strong desire to go to Montreal, it's either a trade to Montreal or they let him walk in free agency, which I don't see them doing. So I think Friedman's right. We're likely going to see a trade. It's just a matter of the return. But to me, I think it makes more sense. Like a more likely package would be whether it be Dufour or another roster player who can help them right away, along with the first-round pick of the Florida Panthers. And then I think you're looking at more like a prospect like a Riley Kidney, for example. I think right now is projecting better than Masar. And then you're also going to be looking at probably including a young defenseman in that trade. They have plenty of them. I'm not sure which one would be included, but certainly one of the young D that would be, out of the Jets' radar would make a lot of sense. So let me know your thoughts on this potential PLD trade to Montreal. Does this trade proposal sound any better than the ones we've looked at before? Do you think it's realistic it could happen? Should the Habs just wait, try to sign him as a UFA? Let me know your thoughts on that, as well as the other information we learned on that he really wanted the Habs to offer him in 2020. Can you imagine how that would have went down and what kind of compensation might have been needed if they signed him to a longer-term big money contract? Let me know your thoughts on that and more down in the comments. We'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with the latest news, rumors, and analysis of all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.